So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anaphylaxis Campaign, for inviting me. Everybody for being here. As you heard, my name is Nikos Papadopoulos. It's not very easy to pronounce. And I am Professor of Allergy and Pediatric Allergy, and I'm based in Manchester and in Athens, Greece. So I'm one of these people that have, brought commuting to a different level. I travel a couple of times a month. And I mean, the upside of that is that I do experience the problems of allergic individuals, mostly children, in two different health systems and in two different environments, which is very interesting. These are my disclosures. They're not directly relevant to this talk, but I have worked and I continue working with different industries which are involved with allergy. And I'm sure that you've heard already, and you know that food allergy, first of all, it is increasing. Like all the other allergies, like asthma has been increasing for many years, and rhinitis has been increasing. And we do have evidence that also food allergy is increasing. It's not as much as other, for example, the respiratory allergic diseases, but it is increasing as well. And what's very interesting is that it is also very variable. So if you can see here on the left-hand side, you can see here, you can compare the prevalence of allergy to egg in the EU in comparison to Greece. So we have collaborated in both. This is a Europreval report. And you will observe that there is a very big difference. In fact, there are important differences within a country. And if you check different centers around the country, you'll see that there are important differences, and we can't yet explain them very well. The second thing that you can observe is that UK is number one, which means that we need to do something about it. And this is a very sort of clinical and sterile slide. It says that the impact of food allergy on quality of life is big, is important. Of course it is. It is a lot. It generally impacts quality of life. It limits activities, especially in severe cases. You have pronounced effects, also sometimes nutritional deficiencies. And the main problem is that even if you try a lot and you do everything by the book, you still have several reactions which you cannot avoid by accident. What we currently recommend for food allergy, the strategy is, first of all, you need to find the offending food. This is not very easy all the time because there are many complex cases. So we have to work on identifying the allergen, and then we tell people you shouldn't eat that, you should try to avoid it. And if something happens, then you need to use your auto-injector and some other medications. Of course, we train them, and this is very important to train them properly. You heard about that, and there are many people who contribute towards that. However, and this is also what is said by the guidelines, however, when you ask both patients and health professionals, is that what you want? They say, well, no, this is not enough. We want more. We want much more than just having to avoid something, knowing how to avoid it well, having a reaction from time to time. So there is an important need to have something more. And we do have something more in allergy. We have allergen immunotherapy. This is not new. This is something that started happening more than 100 years ago. Actually, it was first published in Lancet in 1911. We had a celebration for 100 years, some years ago already. And it is the gradual, the increasing the delivery of an allergen which desensitizes and sometimes tolerates. And this is used for respiratory allergy regularly worldwide. There is clear effectiveness, and we have shown that with many trials. In fact, when you compare immunotherapy results with medication results, you see in many cases immunotherapy is much better than the medications. And it is rather safe. The new preparations are quite safe in respiratory immunotherapy. So why don't we use this classical immunotherapy with food allergy? And what's the problem about that? It is, to an extent, because of some unfortunate events, and mostly this study, people have started trying to use injection immunotherapy with peanut, which is one of the major problems worldwide, peanut allergy. And they have started including patients with a schedule of peanut immunotherapy. However, there was an accident. Actually, one patient was supposed to be taking placebo. He got high-dose peanut injection instead, and unfortunately they died. So the trial stopped, and the whole program stopped, and the whole field stopped for many years. Of course, during that time, during the time that the trial was going on, they had managed to have 3 patients going through the trial, and these patients have improved, so efficacy was there in a way, but at the same time they had a high level of systemic reactions, about 13%. So people would react. And the baseline is that you start from something which is effective but not completely safe. For this reason, there have been many strategies to improve the approach. Strategies looking at changing allergens, and many people have been working on that, making hypoallergens. I'll give you some results from our studies later on. Or different delivery methods, and the epicutaneous immunotherapy, if you heard already about, or the oral immunotherapy, are these alternative delivery, or using some adjunct treatments, something that would protect you, for example, anti-IgE together with immunotherapy in order to improve its safety. And in some cases, for example, you already heard probiotics to also improve its efficacy. But of course, one has to ask when they're thinking about starting an oral immunotherapy procedure, to what food? Because different food allergies have very different natural histories. And as you know, with milk and egg, in most cases, kids who have these problems will outgrow them after a year or 2 or 5, while allergies like the one to peanut or to fish, they persist for many years. So the natural history is important. And because egg and milk are most of the times relatively easier, and they have a natural history which in most cases will be overcome in a few years, we have this homemade oral immunotherapy. We have the ladders, both for milk and egg. And basically you start with processed food to start with in very small quantities, and you increase towards less processed food and higher quantities, which is working in clinical practice. And well, the problem of this is that it's not standardized, so it still has some dangers, and it cannot be standardized because the food and the processing of food cannot be designed beforehand. Our experience has been for many years, actually, in all Southern Europe, this type of approach using, for example, baked egg, in this case, is something that has happening for many years. So when I started doing my training in allergy, my professor told me that this is what we do. We use cakes with baked egg, and the children that have allergy to egg, we give them very small quantities, and we increase that, and that was 25 years ago. And some 10 years ago, we actually got all these children, and we found out, first of all, that about 95% or more than 95% of them would actually tolerate baked egg, the ones that had allergy to egg. And then if we started this feeding regime with number of cakes, which were baked with a specific number of eggs, then after 6 months, we will have about 95% of them tolerate egg. And what was expected from natural history was 60 to 70%. So already then we said that this is something that people should be doing. However, when we actually tried to go to a company, food company, and say, let's prepare something like that in order to give children, they told us that it's actually very difficult to characterize egg within a cake. So you really need to be very thorough on how much you put in and what is the temperature and what are the other ingredients. So it's really very difficult to turn this food into a medication. So make this a formal medical procedure. However, in all these years, there have been many groups looking at formal procedures for oral immunotherapy. As I said, this is the delivery of the food in small quantities to start with, or processed, and then increasing quantities until reaching a stage that the person can tolerate the food, or first be desensitized, so not reacting while they're doing the procedure, and in some cases tolerating, which means being able to eat the food even after the procedure. And there have been many studies, so this is a summary of many of these studies. And as you can see here, so if you're left from this line, it means that this study has shown efficacy. And as you can see, all of the studies basically have shown that this is an efficient and efficacious procedure. These are all together. So basically, about 80% of cases with food allergy can actually tolerate, among the ones that have been included in the trials, they can tolerate the food they're allergic to if they go through this oral immunotherapy procedure. And of course, the problem, as I've mentioned, is safety. So I'll show you a few studies to understand what are the levels of concern And what are the results? So this was one of the first studies in a German group, and they included 23 children between 3 and 40 years of age, and these were highly sensitized to peanuts. So they had almost 100 kilo units per liter. This is a high level of sensitization. These children could not have peanut at all. And they tried to have an initial RAS protocol, so they tried to give them, increase the level of peanut rapidly in the beginning, in the first week. They didn't manage to do that. Only one child out of 23 managed to get to this level that they were expecting. But then they started slowly going up every 2 weeks. And most of the children, 14 out of 23, managed to get to a decent level after 7 months. This is really a slow build-up. And then they took another 2 months of that level, and then they were evaluated. And as you can see here, this is the level of peanuts that they could consume before this procedure, and this is how much it increased after the procedure. It is a lot, this is significant. And on the right-hand side, this is the number of adverse events they have experienced. So you can see here during this rush phase, it was about 8% of feedings, 8% of doses that there was an objective symptom. And during the whole follow-up, it was about 2.6% of symptoms. Not too bad, but still it's a considerable proportion. In the next study, that's from the United States, again about the same number of children, again highly sensitized, and this time the protocol was a 3-phase. First of all, the rush one, very quick one, the first day, then they built up for 44 weeks, and then they had the maintenance for 4 weeks. They used partially defatted peanut flour, as well described as possible, and they reached up to 4 grams of this flour, which is equivalent to about 16 peanuts, so quite a bit. 3 out of these children dropped out, so they have 16 active and 9 placebo to compare. And in the end, they did a placebo-controlled food challenge with 5 grams of peanut, which is 20 peanuts approximately. And as you can see here, all the children that managed to reach that level could take the 5 grams in comparison to the much lower level that the children that received placebo. So evidently, the efficacy was really very strong in this approach. And in terms of safety, you had in the first day, this day that they increased the dose rapidly, about half the children requiring treatment, having a reaction. 2 of them needed an adrenaline. So that was, well, not very easy for the people doing it, either the doctors or the patients. Then, when we were talking about the build-up, it was about 1.2% of 400 doses that we had systemic reactions. So, again, this is not too much, but still there is a small concern about this proportion of cases. Let's go now to a study from the UK, Andy Clark's study. They had included 85 kids, and these received 26 weeks of either immunotherapy or avoidance. This was an open label study, and there was a 2-phase, an increasing phase and a maintenance phase, and the increase was in 2-week increments, and the maintenance dose was 0.8 grams of peanut flour, so a couple of peanuts, 3 peanuts. And then, after they reached the 6 months, then they actually gave the opportunity to the avoidance group to have the same procedure as well. And you can see the results. This is how much they could tolerate beforehand, and this is the group that received active immunotherapy in comparison to placebo. These kids could have more than 1,000 milligrams of peanut protein after 6 months, and when this group started having the procedure, they managed to achieve the same level after 1 year. So really has efficacy. And from these results, from this group, actually there was a 22% of participants that had experienced wheezing. So this is a high-ish proportion. It was not too serious. One of them only had laryngeal edema, so that's a little bit more worrying. And 20% had to receive inhaled beta-2 agonists, obviously for wheezing. There was only 1 case that needed adrenaline during the trial. So you can see this is more or less the balance between the efficacy and the safety that we have nowadays, and this is not very different from cases of or other allergens. This is an example for egg. and a double-blind placebo-controlled trials in children with egg allergy. And you see here that after the, I think it was 6 months, then the placebo, actually, no, here it is. This is 10 months, the 5 grams, and then 22 months at 10 grams. The placebo children did not reach that at all, while a big proportion of children that receive immunotherapy did reach this level of tolerance. And about 30%, so 28% of the kids actually had sustained unresponsiveness after 2 years. So they stopped the procedure, and after 2 years they still, so they were cured in a way. That was about 30% of the population. There are alternative procedures to oral immunotherapy. For example, sublingual immunotherapy. It sounds almost the same, but it's not. So in sublingual, you use much lower doses and just put them under the tongue. And it has some efficacy, but it is a little bit less efficacious, and it's a little bit more safe. So most of the protocols nowadays follow this oral procedure. So can we use this at the clinic, and can we optimize it? It's not very easy, but it is doable. One needs to look on the right patients. So the choice of patient is important. Not every patient can actually fit in the schedule. The schedules need to be optimized around what experience we have and also around the patients. And of course, they have to be really very well trained in order to deal with these reactions. And they need to be very closely monitored. I think this is the most challenging aspect for setting up a desensitization clinic. In terms of which patient should we choose, so the severity of the reaction is very important. So the more severe the reaction, the higher the chances that the patient will have more reactions. So these are the more difficult ones. And this is the same also with sensitization level. The most sensitized patients are the ones that have the higher risk of having reactions. The less sensitized are the ones that go through the procedure with not many problems. In terms of comorbidities, our main concern is asthma, because most of the severe reactions will include asthma, so we have to take this into account. And of course, the type of patient, if the patient really needs to collaborate, these are long-term procedures, so the patients need to collaborate very well and have a very close contact. And of course, we need to take into account other circumstances. The irony is that the chances of success of these procedures are inverse to the needs. So the ones that really need it more, the patients which are more sensitized, have the more severe reactions, are the ones that are more difficult. And the ones that are easier patients are the ones that we expect to have a more straightforward treatment. In terms of the protocol, basically there are many. So each group designs their own protocol. Protocols have not been compared. Basically there is an initial phase, which is a rush phase, or you try to reach a level as fast as possible. Then the patient comes back. We have experience to do that every week, every 2 weeks, every month. But it is mostly about the circumstances and the logistics rather than the science. You reach a specific level and then you continue. And more work needs to be done. However, there are most of the protocols that have been used seem to be efficient. We have this is a chart from our initial population. For example, we started with a number of patients that actually had quite a low level of specific IgE, so less sensitized. And very quickly, after about 6 months to a year, these were children were all over 5 years of age. They had a long history of milk allergy. And all of them actually managed to have milk without a problem after 6 to 12 months. Then we started working with kids with higher level of IgE, so the ones that are more dangerous to react. And again, almost all of them have managed to reach in longer periods of time to having a whole glass of milk. Importantly, we had one dropout because of the development of eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a different type of a food allergy. And it seems that a small proportion of people who undergo oral immunotherapy, they might develop this type of condition. And then we changed our protocol, and we did the same type of patient with a different protocol with the same type of results. Now, there is another alternative, which is an interesting one, which is a type of home oral immunotherapy, which has been suggested by several Italian groups. And we have some experience with that as well. But then you really need very close monitoring of the patient. And it's based on very, very slow increases every day. So a 10% increase, And starting from a very small dose, a 10% increase means that the parent or the patient should have a scale, and they should start from 1 milligram. And recently we're doing that with wheat. So we start with 1 spaghetti, we get a very tiny bit of that spaghetti, and this is 1 or 50 milligrams, and then you get 10%, which is 1.1, and then you get another one, which is 1.21. So people need to be really involved. But the good thing about that is that you have less reactions, not too many reactions than the other protocols. And in wheat, we have now included about a dozen kids, and these were very severe cases, and we haven't had any reactions. So it is an interesting approach, but you really need to be close to the patients because they would ask many questions, and there will be many circumstances that need to be dealt with. So what about the training? Of course, the same training that you would do with your allergic patients, but here you need to be certain that people will understand the signs in order to train, to give the adrenaline. They need to be very comfortable with its use. So in several patients, they would need to use it 1 or 2 times during the protocol. And of course, what is important, they need to understand the additional factors for the elicitation of anaphylaxis. Because when it happens, it's not only because of food. In many cases, it's because there is some secondary stressor. It's either exercise or it is an infection. Very often, actually, most of our cases of reactions have been when you're well, you go through your procedure, then you get a cold, and then you suddenly have a reaction. And then you need to reduce the dose, you need to provide antihistamines, you need to somehow start slowly going up again. And these are different ways of minimizing the risk of reactions. We give this information to the patients. If they are stressed in any way, we tell them to go down 1 or 2 doses and then start building up again. Of course, this is empirical. There is no hardcore data to support that, but it seems to be working. And in some cases, perhaps using antihistamines for extensive periods of time. This is something, again, that is not backed from data. It is empirical. And as I said, the major challenge is close monitoring, because most of the patients will actually start doing such a protocol if they know they have a direct access, and they can take a phone call, and they can ask any kind of question, because they do that day in, day out. They might have a minor symptom. What should they do with a minor symptom? Should they increase the dose again? Should they decrease it? So access to helpline would be very important. It's not available in many places. It's not easy to set up. And of course, you need to have the clinical service that will receive this patient if there is a reaction, if they want to have to go to the service, and they need to provide information for the next step. So because of all this contradiction, actually in the context of the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, we have been discussing on whether this should be a research procedure or a clinical procedure. It's still a very hot topic, and the recent guidelines or the suggestion is that this can be performed as a clinical procedure only in highly specialized centers. So this is an intermediate step. But it is happening, as I said, in Southern Europe. It is happening in many centers, and also in private practices. It's something which is happening, and it's already happening in the UK as well. But I think this is only one clinic, is Andy Clark's clinic in Cambridge, where they are offering this service on a private basis. Still, we have a lot of research to do in order to optimize these protocols and use them comfortably in everyday practice. Some of this research is already happening. I'll give you a couple of examples. We are working with modified allergens, hypoallergens. So we have worked together with Nestlé in having a hypoallergenic egg and try to feed kids with hypoallergenic egg. We found out that it was safe, so the child reacted to this substance to start with, and they received it for a period of time, 6 months, without a problem. There was an improvement in their characteristics in blood, so in the IgE levels, but there was a small improvement in clinical reactivity, but this was not significant. So it seems that with these hypoallergenic products, you probably need more time in order to achieve efficacy. This was also the case in a very recent study. This has not been published. We actually are now writing up the results, which we did an injection immunotherapy to a hypoallergen of fish. This was a study supported by the EU, And we have managed to change to a double-blind placebo-controlled. And you can see here that through the 4 months of the study, you had basically a small increase in the level of skin prick testing on the Ig reactivity in the placebo group, but a significant decrease in the group that received that immunotherapy. So there was a strong immunological signal, but there was no clinical signal, again suggesting that this type of hypoallergens, the ones that have been modified not to be too allergenic, they probably need more time to go through the steps of first dealing with the immune aspect and then having some clinical result. And you've already heard about epicutaneous immunotherapy. This is still experimental. This is the patch, but I think what's important is what is inside. It seems so from not published data, from abstracts, etc., it seems that it is an interesting approach, but we wait to see how good it is. So in conclusion, there is a big need of better management of food allergy, and we do have the solution, but it is in principle. So we need to take careful steps to bring this solution into daily practice. And for this, we need increased patient monitoring and personal attention to the patient. We need more time. And for this, we need increased resources. I think that's the main challenge. At the moment, there are some highly specialized centers that are taking the lead. There is already one in the UK, and we are planning and we're setting up a service like that in Manchester, but it will not be available very soon. The major challenge is the logistics and the financing. You need to find out who's going to be doing it, how you're going to be talking with patients. And of course, we need to be certain that this is going to be 100% safe, which is the main concern. The NHS should also appreciate that and support it. And in parallel, we need to do a lot of research in order to optimize and improve the alternatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Very interesting. Does anyone have any questions? I think we've got time for apparently one question. We have, that lady there, I think. Yeah, you haven't asked a question before. If you just wait for the mic. Sorry.
I actually live in France, and you said you go to and from Greece and here. Do you have any idea why you do see such big discrepancies from one country to another? Because I have noticed, just as a parent in France, that allergies are not in the conversation really at all, because it's people are not as affected by it but as we are in places like the UK and Australia.
Well, UK and Australia are on the top of the list. We don't really know why. You know, people are saying jokes that perhaps is the English language, and but you need to know that actually after the UK, Australia, and the US, you have Spanish-speaking countries in South America that are where allergies are highly prevalent, and this cannot be explained by language or by Western civilizations things. We don't really know. It's also within a country where you have really major differences. So with ISAC, which was a study around asthma and other allergic diseases, you could see that in the UK, between 6 or 7 centers, there was almost an order of magnitude of difference in the prevalence of rhinitis and asthma. This is related to different environments. Which parts of the environments are the ones that make you more or less susceptible? Again, we don't know. We know about pollution that is not good. We know about several factors that increase the risk, but we cannot really pinpoint and say that in Manchester, for example, which is #1 on asthma in the world, why this is happening. My personal perspective is related to different microbiomes, because the microbiomes can be changed significantly and they can differ from area to area depending on many of the exposures. But this is not backed in data. And in France, it's not actually in France the level is not very low. Actually, the level of allergies in France is not very low. So the Central Europe, generally Europe, has a level which is a little bit lower than the UK, but is not very low. In Southern Europe, where you have sort of an east, so if you go to Greece, Turkey, these places they have, or Albania, for example, they have much lower incidence of allergies and food allergies. Thank you.